It is a chilly Wednesday morning. Soldiers are awake, unloading equipment and manning their posts. But something is about to make today anything but ordinary, and it is something nobody there could hear. It was less than 170 miles away, in the droning buzz of Japanese planes, preparing for an attack on Dutch Harbor designed by General Izuruku Yamamoto, a grueling battle that would force the Americans to fight desperately for their lives while taking a stand for their country in the Aleutian Campaign. It would result in the capture of the feared Japanese Zero, turning the tide of the war and demonstrating the importance of the Alaska defense in World War II. Now, little did the Americans stationed at Dutch Harbor know, the Japanese were about to carry out their brutal surprise attack. Then, the Japanese Zeros, the deadliest planes in World War II, lifted off from their carriers on the verge of the start of the battle that would elevate Alaska's importance in World War II and the military presence in Alaska. In the 1940s, many crises were occurring that threatened the freedom of America. Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party in Germany were the most obvious threat, but there was also Benito Mussolini in Italy and Francisco Franco in Spain. These leaders challenged both the idea of democracy and the security of some of America's closest allies. America had remained neutral for early portions of the war, but following Hitler's invasion of Poland and the spread of war in Europe in 1939, America started to wonder if they could remain neutral much longer. The United States would finally go to war against Hitler and the other Axis nations, but its first battle of World War II would interestingly not involve the Europeans. In the early morning hours of June 3, 1942, fleets of Japanese planes took off from their carriers, the Ryujo and the Junyo, less than 170 miles from Dutch Harbor, Alaska, to start the initial attack. The American forces stationed at Dutch Harbor, receiving a warning of an attack but not knowing when, were caught off guard and not prepared for what lay ahead. The bombing started, and destruction rained down upon Dutch Harbor. They hit barracks, warehouses, oil storage tanks, planes on the ground, ships in the harbor, and ammunition dumps. We took cover in foxholes and hillsides near our barracks. The American soldiers soon realized the situation they were in, and ran to their defensive stations around the island. Firing their land-based fighters at the Japanese planes, the American military were fighting back against the invading forces with everything they had.
The defense of Dutch Harbor, you can look at it in two ways. One was the ground defense, which was amazing. The Japanese did not expect them to be ready for them. They did not expect them to come together very quickly. But as far as air defense, there really wasn't any.
The attack on June 3rd lasted about 20 minutes, dealing damage to Fort Mears, the radio station, and the oil tanks. In total, about 25 American pilots and soldiers had died. The Americans were worn out, but they knew that if the Japanese attacked again, they would have to be ready. After the bombing of Fort Mears on June 3rd, defenses at the military base of Dutch Harbor were being manned 24/7. Soldiers took up their positions at battleships and in turrets. On June 4th, 1942, only a day after the bombing of Fort Mears, a squad of Japanese planes containing 10 fighters and 11 dive bombers attacked Dutch Harbor for the second time in 2 days. This time, though, the American Army was better prepared. After the disastrous attack on June 3rd, ships like the Fillmore had been reinforced with even more powerful guns for the inevitable return of the Japanese forces. They met the Japanese planes with intense ground fire from the military forces stationed at Dutch Harbor. The Fillmore and the other American ships blasted plane after plane out of the sky with the new powerful turrets. Even with this added firepower against them, the Japanese planes executed part of their goal and destroyed 4 new steel oil tanks containing almost 750,000 gallons of fuel. However, when the Japanese Zero planes were regrouping, the Alaskans attacked with the best aircraft they had, the Curtiss P-40 Warhawk. 4 of the Zeros were shot down in a matter of minutes. Japanese Lieutenant Yamagami stated that he was surprised by the accuracy and how fast anti-aircraft guns were in operation. The Americans had successfully defended their country from the Japanese attack. But perhaps the biggest success of the American stand was the capturing of a Japanese Zero, the most fearsome plane in World War II. On June 4th, young Japanese pilot Tadayoshi Koka took off for Dutch Harbor on his normal patrol. He was caught in a firefight and his oil line was severed. The plane crashed onto Alaskan soil, killing Tadayoshi on impact. The Navy was able to recover the plane.
Well, they got it off the Tundra, first of all, and it was almost intact, which was pretty amazing. It was even more intact than the P-40 we're trying to put together here. And then they shipped it up, packed it up, and took it to California, where they reassembled it, fixed it, and then were able to test fly it from there and find out what its characteristics were and what they could do to fly against it.
The Americans took the Zero out for 24 test flights. They discovered 2 weaknesses in the Zero design. It was almost impossible to perform rolls at high speeds, and the engine would sputter badly when the plane dove at a high speed. Now the Allies knew the strengths and weaknesses of the most powerful plane in World War II. It would result in a definite advantage for the American forces over the Japanese.
In order for the Americans to go against the highly maneuverable Zero, the very fast Zero, they had to find a way. I mean, this was a gift. Usually the Alaska Tundra doesn't yield a lot of gifts, but this was a true treasure that allowed them to figure out how to go against it. And yeah, undoubtedly in the Pacific, it helped win the war.
Although this event had a major impact on Alaska's Aleutian Islands, it took multiple weeks for news to reach the United States newspapers due to Alaska's poor communication with other states. After the Battle of Dutch Harbor, Japan continued their assault by taking the Aleutian Islands of Kiska and Attu, the first time American soil was taken and held by a foreign country since the War of 1812. Villagers of the islands were sent to internment camps in Japan and other occupied islands. For the next 18 months, taking back these islands was the prime objective for the U.S. military. Troops, warships, and warplanes were all sent to help reinforce the territory. Naval Admiral reinforcements created a blockade restricting supplies to get on and off Attu. The U.S. planned an attack that would take back Attu from the Japanese. Sergeant Albert Brown's 7th Infantry Division soon landed on Attu by boat. The Japanese readied a powerful fleet of ships in Tokyo Bay that were hoping to repel the attack on Attu, but before the fleet could depart, the Americans had already started the attack. With no hope of rescue, General Yamasaki, the only general left on Attu, led his remaining troops into the only land-fought battle on American soil in World War II. The American army was surprised by the sudden push of the Japanese troops. The momentum of the attack broke through American front lines. However, the American army quickly recovered and fought until they had defeated the remaining Japanese. The bloody Battle of Attu ended with a total death toll of 549 Americans and 2,850 Japanese. Shortly after, the Japanese secretly withdrew their remaining garrison from Kiska, ending all Japanese occupation of the Aleutian Islands on July 28, 1943. The U.S. launched another attack with the intention of taking back the island of Kiska on August 15, 1943, only to discover that the island was devoid of any Japanese troops. This would conclude the brutal Aleutian campaign. Before the attack on Dutch Harbor, Alaska was almost undefended compared to the other areas in the United States. After the bombings, however, Alaska's military bases turned into a top priority defense unit. But things weren't just improving in Alaska. The entire Allied forces benefited from the encounter on Dutch Harbor. Now armed with the knowledge needed to best the Zero in combat, the Allies quickly formulated strategies to defeat the Japanese in the air. Marine Captain Kenneth Walsh described how he used information from the Zero test flights to finish World War II with 17 aerial victories over Japanese Zeros. With a Zero on my tail, I did a split S. Then, as prescribed, I rolled hard right. From information that came from the Zero, I knew that the Zero rolled more slowly to the right. If I hadn't known which way to turn or roll, I'd probably rolled to my left. If I had done that, the Zero would likely have turned with me. I used that maneuver a number of times to get away from Zeros. Marine Captain Kenneth Walsh was just one of the many that benefited from the captured Zero. With the captured Zero plane and the information that came with it, the United States were formidable and able to fight the Japanese on equal terms. Though unrecognized compared to other events in the war, the bombing of Dutch Harbor and the battles of the Aleutian Islands was ultimately a devastating event that changed the course of history for Japan and the United States.